Our next speaker is composer and performer Pauline Frechette. Pauline has a foundation of playing in youth symphonies on violin, winning awards in piano competitions, and touring Europe singing and dancing as a teen and studying acting in England. Pauline feels among her all of her talents that her greatest gift and passion is composing music, and her works are best defined as neoclassical. Her compositions have been performed by various symphonies and orchestras, including the Baltimore Symphony, Hollywood Bowl Orchestra, New West Symphonies, and much more. And she has also composed songs for TV and film, and her musicals have been produced by the Goodspeed Opera House, the La Mirada Theater for the Performing Arts, and the Baroque Theater in New York City. She especially loves writing ballets. As a singer and performer, she considers herself a 21st century contemporary poet musician, and her credits include singing on major motion pictures such as Aladdin and Rent, as well as performing and recording with many legendary artists. Her last two albums debuted on Billboard's top 10 classical and classical crossover charts, and her music is currently being played in over 125 countries and won the Best Instrumental West Australian Music Award in 2020, 3 silver awards in 3 categories in 2021, and has over 5 million plays on Spotify, 7 million plays on SoundCloud, and 2.4 million plays on Reverb Nation, and has been #1 on their classical charts nationally and globally for 3 years. In 2021, Pauline was awarded the title Ambassador for Peace Through Music by the Youth Education and Leadership Initiative in Nigeria, Africa. Without waiting any further, please welcome Pauline Frechette.
Well, hi. So pleased to be here today. My background is quite varied. I was born and raised in Hammond, Indiana, in a steel town, small town, one of 11 children. My parents were French Canadian, and my grandfather was a musician. My great-grandfather founded the Quebec Symphony. So being one of 11, we all played at least 2 instruments. So that was very interesting growing up, hearing the trumpet in the basement, the drums in the basement, the organ and the piano in the living room, and somebody bereting their ballet through the dining room. It was quite a wild household. And my mother was really great because from a very young age, she kept this, it's a Canadian thing that they call joie de vivre, a joy of life, which kind of has infused my life, this joy of creating, joy of life. And she taught us from a very young age that because there were so many of us, they wouldn't be able to do much financially for us, but we could reach any dream as long as we had a lot of persistence, and you had to really love what you did and really go for it 100%. And my mom also taught me very young that you probably get more mileage in life by being honest and kind and having a great personality with people than almost anything. And that has seen me through so many hard times. It's just those simple things of being honest and being trustworthy and kind and having a deep love for what you do. Now, being an artist, I don't know how many out there, if that's your pursuit, but I mean, it goes across, well, creating life is an art, really. So no matter what you do, it's art. But being an artist, like a musician and a performer, there's a lot of competition. And I know that there's competition in any area that you're going to go into. So the idea is that the competition is fun. I used to be a swimmer as a kid. And when I go into a meet, swimming meet, I always wanted to swim next to the fastest swimmer so that I would know where I was at in the lineup. And just when I hit that water and go for it, but I loved swimming, you see. It wasn't something I didn't like. Other things that I didn't like, I didn't do as well. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna focus on what I really, really love. I love music, I love performing. You almost couldn't drag me out of a theater as a kid. So I started as really young. My father had a radio show. And so I started by singing on the radio show when I was, 4 or 5. They're very funny records of me singing. And then, of course, I was in The Sound of Music in a local production as a child. And my brother and I and my sister, with a local priest, because I was raised Catholic, we started a group called the Show Teens because we all love to perform. And ended up being 10 of us in this group. And we just set our idea that we wanted to get out of Indiana and see more of the world. So we started by doing Broadway numbers and folk songs, I guess. A lot of us played guitar. And we took this dream of wanting to get out into the world, and with this priest behind us, we actually ended up raising enough money to go to Europe. And we performed all over Germany the first year. And we performed on a boat, an ocean liner on the way back called the Hanseatic. And it was an incredible adventure. And then, of course, we did the same thing the following year. But the main point here is that we really had this dream of wanting to go out and see the world together and have these adventures. And we were very focused and really hardworking. We all had to keep our grades up, of course. And then every night we'd be performing and practicing all these things. Now, I was in high school at the time of this, and I had a bigger dream. I wanted to go to the best acting school in the world, which was in England. Well, that's a pretty high dream, stellar dream. I'd sit with my mom in the kitchen and she'd say, well, if that's your dream, we can go for it. You just have to figure out a plan. So how am I going to find? There was no internet, of course, then, or whatever. You'd have to go to the library. But when I was on the Hanseatic coming back from Europe, there was a gentleman, we had to stop in Southampton going from Germany first to England and then to New York. And this gentleman on board the ship, he loved the Show Teens, and he had a young son, and he became our friends. We were just, it was just 24 hours, I guess, knowing them. But anyway, I told him this dream that I had of going to a great British drama school. So he said that he would find out information for me and would let me know about it, and via letters and so forth. So during the year, he sent me all the information, packets of information about the 3 best drama schools, and I contacted them and I did the applications, and it turned out that you had to do the final audition in England. So I would have to be in London to audition. So I figured it out. Okay, well, next summer with the Show Teens, we had already planned, we were going all over, this time in Italy, Germany, and France. We're going to end up in Paris. So, oh, perfect. I can go from Paris to London and do this audition. So again, it's keeping in mind this thing of persistence and focus and really driving toward your goal, no matter what seems impossible, because this seemed like a pretty impossible goal. So I got through the first part, I was very good at school. So you had to do an essay and tell the different shows I'd been in. Of course, I'd won different things as a violinist and a pianist, but that wasn't my biggest drive at the time, was performing. I wanted to perform. So I went from London, I left Paris with the Show Teens and went by myself on the ferry boat from Paris to London. And the gentleman and his son picked me up in Southampton and took me to dinner and whatnot. And he had already, through the school, I had found a place to stay, a youth hostel where other students stayed. And I got there and had the audition. At the end of the audition, the president of the school said, well, we only take 2 Americans. Why do you think you should be one of them? And I said, well, my clothes are halfway across the ocean. So she thought that was a pretty good answer, I guess. And anyway, I got in, and it was just a matter of being persistent and knowing exactly what I wanted. So I got to spend a year in London as a student at the London School of Dramatic Art. And during that time, I also auditioned for the Bristol Old Vic, and I was accepted there. I went to the Old Vic for their smaller, they called it a week, where you studied with them, and then they offered me to go there, but of course couldn't afford to go because they don't give American scholarships. But that was an interesting adventure for an 18-year-old to really learn how being persistent and knowing exactly what I wanted and being really focused. So I found myself back in Indiana now, and I'm 19. And what do I want to do now? And so, London at that time was amazing. And so I was in Chicago, and my father had gone to the American Conservatory of Music. So I said, well, let me see if there's any if I can audition for a scholarship for there. Now, this is another very interesting story. Again, it goes back to this principle of being very persistent, focused, having a deep passion for what I wanted, and keeping my 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 joie de vivre there, so that people wanted me to be part of their group or part of whatever it was they were doing. Well, I go in for this audition for the conservatory. Now I'm going to be a voice major, because at that point, and a piano minor, composition. And I thought, well, I really want to be a performer. Well, I had no opera background at all. In fact, I had never had any singing lessons. I just happened to have a good voice. So I was really a rough diamond. Now I go in for this audition, and there's these about 6 members of the Foundation for Arts Scholarship Board from Chicago. And they were older ladies and all beautiful and very well coiffed. And this is a very big ballroom with the 2 grand pianos facing each other. So I come in very nicely, and the girl before me had this, who was auditioning, you could hear, obviously you're waiting in the other room, these opera singers. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. Well, I thought to myself, just have to be who I am. So I walk in, and I had a little art song that I had prepared. So, I mean, I have a pretty voice, but it wasn't going to compare to these opera singers I was hearing. So I go in and I sing my art song, and they were being very nice. And I said, well, do you know what I really want to do? And the ladies, first we sat down and they just talked to you. And I told them about my adventures in England. And they loved all that. And then I said, well, do you know what I really want to do? And they said, well, they found it very amusing the way I was presenting myself. I said, well, I actually write songs, and I have my guitar here, and I love to tap dance. Well, now this was completely unheard of for this kind of an audition. So I said, do you want to see me tap dance? So I rolled up the carpet, and I did this funny tap dance. And then I took out my guitar, and I sang a folk song I'd written. Well, I so charmed them that I not only won the scholarship, but they kept it running for the 3 years that I was at the conservatory. And when I later was cast in a Broadway musical, they turned my scholarship into cash stipends and sent them to me every month to help me continue my career in New York. And that was just, and I love these ladies. I really love to sit and listen to them. And they would have these teas, and the other girls would say, oh, because when you were a scholarship student, you were expected to be part of this, the Foundation for Arts. So I would go, and I love to hear their stories and just be with them. And anytime they wanted me to speak to younger artists, I would. In fact, later in my career, when I was in Chicago performing, I was Neil Diamond's duet partner, and we performed at the Chicago Stadium. And so they asked if I would talk to the young students there, because since I was a graduate from years earlier. And so I said, of course. And it was so great to go back there and to be in that ballroom where I had first auditioned when I was 19, and to see these young 19 years old. And this is 20 years later, and here I am at the Chicago Stadium starring with Neil Diamond. It was quite an amazing thing to see these young people. And I said to them the same thing I'm saying to you, which is you build your life on simplicities, on truths. One is being who you are and having a love for what you do. That's really the infectious thing. I mean, if you think of the really greats in any area, they're passionate about what they do. There's no way you could be successful and not be passionate about what you do, or you'd be very miserable. Because when it comes down to, when push comes to shove, and as an artist, and you have to like sit at that piano for hours on end, or you have these auditions, or you're standing in line in New York for an audition for hours, and then they line you up and they say, you stay, everybody else goes. And I was always one to go because I was so short, and the tall girls or whatever. And but then I'd go take a tap dancing class and feel good again. It's sort of, you bounce back because there's this love for what you're doing. So that was the early part, was Chicago, growing up in Indiana, getting all these basics in. Then I moved to New York. Now this is a good, interesting story. Okay, so here I am now at the conservatory and enjoying what I'm doing. But I still had my eye on, I wanted New York. I wanted Broadway. I wanted that dream to be in a Broadway show. So walking through Chicago, there was a club called the Happy Medium, and there was a show called Your Good Man, Charlie Brown, playing at the Happy Medium. And I saw a picture of the cast, and there was the girl playing Lucy. And I said that to myself, Lucy, my brothers always said that I was like Lucy because I was very bossy. Well, I was number 5 of 11, and my 2 brothers were 2 years older than me, and I tagged along them everywhere, wanting to do whatever they did. And just to survive. And if you're in the middle of 11 kids, I guess you get a little bossy. I don't know. But anyway, so I thought, well, I'd be a good Lucy. Now, I'd never seen the musical before, but I had long hair. And so I went and got a short wig, curly wig, and I put the wig on. And I wasn't in the union or anything, but I made up a resume. It was what I'd done, the Sound of Music, and that I'd studied in England and that. And I took it, and I had a picture of myself. I mean, it was not all that professional because I wasn't into that world at the moment. I was at the conservatory, but I really wanted to perform. So I went backstage, to the front door there was the stage manager there, and he looked at me very arrogantly and was kicking me out saying, we're not auditioning anybody and you're not in the union. And just at that moment, the New York producer just happened to be in Chicago, and they refreshed the cast. They come in town and they refresh the cast because the cast is out of New York and playing at the Happy Medium. Gene Person was his name. He was one of the main producers of Charlie Brown. And he saw how cute I was, and the guy was being so mean to me. So he kind of pushed the guy aside and took my resume and said, I'll audition, you come on with us. And we walked into the theater. So again, I go back to these basics that I got from my mom, the persistence, the focus, the being who you are, the joie de vivre. So I was thrilled. So here it was, now there's a Broadway cast, and he said, well, do you sing something for us? Well, I had no music with me, but I know how to sing. And I had my go-to song that I'd been at the conservatory for 3 years by this point and taking vocal lessons all the time. And so my voice had really developed. And I had my song that I could sing no matter where I was. I could really nail it, from Bye Bye Birdie. How Lovely to Be a Woman was the name of it. And I had this high note that I could really belt. So I felt very sure about that. So get up on this little stage, and no piano or anything. I just belt out this song. Sounds great. So he says, great. So then he gets, here's some of the script. So why don't you look that over? So I'm looking it over, and I'm saying, and I'd never seen the show, so I didn't have a preconceived idea. So I just looked at the script, and I gave them the funniest reading of Lucy. I mean, the cast were in the aisle laughing and rolling because it was just me being who I am, bossy Pauline, and it was fantastic. So the producer went out, said, excuse me, went into the lobby, called New York and said, I think I found Lucy. Apparently they'd been auditioning lots of people in New York to find somebody to play Lucy. They needed a Lucy for a new Broadway production, for the Philadelphia show, for the tour. So anyway, I ended up flying to New York, and I left the conservatory at that point and had my dream of going to New York as a star of a Broadway musical, playing Lucy. And again, it came from persistence and focus and doing what I really love. And just also not having an idea that you can't do something like that. I think a lot of us, sometimes someone will say, oh, like for instance, if I had conferred with somebody before doing that audition, they might've said, oh, you're crazy. You're not in equity. You don't have a decent headshot. You can't just knock on the door of a theater and hand somebody your headshot and say, I want to audition for Lucy. Those things, it's not going to get you anywhere. And then you stop. You say, oh, I guess I can't. But the thing is, you can. There's nobody stopping you. You can take your dream. Us teenagers in Indiana saying we want to tour Europe. Well, why not? You get this dream. It's sort of like those old Judy Garland movies. I have a barn. I have some songs. Let's do a play in our garage. In fact, we used to do that as kids. We actually had a garage with these barn doors that open this way, and we'd put on plays back there. And that's where my earliest writing for the theater came, with those backyard plays that we did, which were so much fun. So anyway, so now I was in New York, continuing the saga. So now you're in New York, and did the Charlie Brown thing. And then I left the show because I missed Indiana. So I go back to Indiana and do some more theater in Chicago. Then I really want to be in New York. So back to New York again. That's the other thing. You don't ever have to feel like you're stuck, especially early in life. You just go. But when I get to this later point in my life, you'll see you can always reinvent yourself. I mean, every day you can just wake up and start something new if you wanted to, but be focused and have a plan and go in that direction. So I had my plan. I sat with my mom at the table. I said, okay, I want to live in New York now. Okay, so this is a whole other thing now. At least I had a commercial running in Chicago. I'd done some voiceovers, and I had the credits now from doing Charlie Brown. I had my equity card, and knew a few people. So I go to New York and I've got my one suitcase and one suitcase of clothes, one suitcase of books, get a roommate from the roommate referral thing. I mean, it was pretty wild, but it was an adventure. I mean, I love adventure. So now how do you get an agent in New York? Now that is another trick. So there was, you start auditioning. And again, it's that whole thing of persistence, focus. So, okay, I asked, and you ask people like networking idea. Back then they didn't call it networking, but that's what it is. You ask your friend or who's your agent and could you give me an introduction and that kind of thing. Well, I was finding it hard to get an agent at first, but every time, this is the other thing, you have to have something that you know that you love to do that just picks up your spirits no matter what. Well, for me, it was tap dancing. So we go on these auditions and be one of like 300 waiting outside a theater and then get typecast out immediately. Then I'd go take a tap dancing class and I'd feel good again. So it's just this kind of persistence. So now, how did I get this agent? Well, I got cast in a very small thing called Equity Library Theater production, which was a big deal in New York. And really, some of the top actors would all vie to be in this. Actors, it was a library theater production showcase. Now, I didn't actually have a part in it, but they liked me so much and my personality and stuff that they said, well, why don't you, in between that there's the first act and then we need somebody to pitch the audience to donate to this library theater. So if you could just walk across the stage and do something and then during the intermission. So I took this opportunity to just be myself, be focused, be what I'm funny. I have a natural comedic sense. So I did this little thing with, I don't know, plate. I don't even know. I can't remember exactly what I did, but it was hilarious. And people were rolling, laughing, and I got an agent right then. I wasn't even really part of the show, but that's when I got my first commercial agent in New York. And of course, then I started to book things, TV commercials and such to be able to afford to keep going. So this is all the New York end of my life. Well, now it's now going toward the 80s. And I decide, well, I really, this acting and everything is fun, but I think I'd like to try rock and roll. So my friends and I, one night, we renamed me Raven Kane. As they said, well, Pauline Frechette doesn't sound like a rock singer. And I had been doing all these beautiful songs that I was writing. This whole time I'm also composing. I'm composing music for a children's show on TV, for the Electric Light Theater, I think it was, and for different things. And playing at a lot of clubs. One's called Reno Sweeney, and there was another called the Ballroom, and it was a lot of the chanteuse kind of things, talking to the audience and being funny. But I wanted to try rock and roll, so we named me Raven Kane, and I did makeup with all this really cool makeup, and had this tight pants and stiletto shoes, and did a little video of it. Sent it off to LA, and that's actually how I met my future husband that way. But David Campbell, he was kind of amazed when he first saw the Pauline Frechette video where I kind of looked like I do now with the long hair and singing beautiful songs. And then a month later, he saw a video of me with the wild makeup and the stilettos, really rocking it out as Raven Kane. So I went to LA to do a rock career. Well, now we go back to the same basics of persistence, focus, a plan. And why rock? Well, why not rock? It's sort of like, it's an adventure. So going to these rock clubs, and I got a rock band together with a friend of mine. We called ourselves Vogue 2000, and we were actually really good. Unfortunately, she had a daughter who was born with AIDS from blood transfusion. This is in the mid 80s. And so the band broke up, but we had a great time. Vogue 2000, it was that big hair, and I had a voice very much like the lead singer in Heart, because it was a combination of my opera training and my Broadway training and whatever else. So now to talk about transitioning. Okay, so the rock band wasn't happening, even though we had Chrysalis was a big record company at the time, was interested in us and all this. And So you have to, okay, it's like being on the ocean. There's big waves and they're going to take you down. Well, I knew from my mom that you persistence, you focus, you're doing what you're passionate about, you keep the joie de vivre happening, you keep your integrity in. So I had these basics that was really going on. So what am I going to do with this rock? Well, I didn't really like the rock clubs and I didn't do drugs or anything. Well, I think I'd like to do and now I was with my husband and he does a lot of studio work and he's a composer and an arranger. And there were all these records he was doing. I said, well, I'd like to sing on some of these, but I had to like handle my voice. So I took apart the voice because I had a very Broadway kind of a thing or opera. And in order to sing in studios, you have to be able to control your vibrato. That's vibrato, and different intonations of your voice and so forth. So I decided, well, the best way to learn is to teach. So I started teaching singing, which I became really good at, and taking these basics and pulling them apart and using it for myself, hours and hours, getting that vibrato so I could do anything with it. And so then I had a very lucrative career through the 90s, singing on a lot of records and that's also when I did the world tour with Neil Diamond, but I also sang with, Willie Nelson and Dolly Parton and Cher and Leonard Cohen and I don't know, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr. In fact, Paul, Ringo, and George, I sang backup for them at the Hollywood Bowl. I'll never forget that. On Earth Day, I think it was in 1995 or something. Maybe it was 94, 95. It was amazing, I gotta say, singing Let It Be or backup with them. Na, 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 na. Everybody in the audience with their flashlights. It's just amazing. And you talk about a group that's been persistent, the Beatles, I mean, my gosh, and loving what they do. And as joie de vivre, oh my gosh, Paul McCartney is one of the most joyful people I've ever met. And talk about personality, just so amazing. I mean, I would say that I've learned a lot from all these megastars that I've worked with because they're so intent on what they do and so full of love. Dolly Parton, that's another one. Oh, what a strong, beautiful woman. Or Cher, the same thing. I spent a day with Dolly working in the studio and I saw her on a phone call and she was standing up, really holding her own. She said, afterwards, she said, it's a man's world out there and you gotta hold your own as a woman. You gotta know, and she's quite a businesswoman and an incredible talent and funny and warm, but boy, she is persistent and focused. And all these people, Leonard Cohen, what an incredible individual he is. Again, talk about working hard. I mean, he is a craftsman. He told me that sometimes there'd be a lyric and he would work to get that last one word, just exactly the word that he wanted. Hours, days, maybe not, the song wouldn't be done for a while. I mean, just to get that exact what he wanted, his intention. What a beautiful being he was. I mean, just amazing. We worked on his album, The Future was called. So that was the 90s. So a lot of singing in studios, and it was a fun game to play. And I had my daughter then, and singing on films like Rent and Aladdin, and that was really great fun. I like singing in big groups. But then, okay, now I felt like, I miss Broadway. So it's time to do Broadway again. So I had written a musical back, it was right before the Raven Kane period, or right at the beginning of it, actually, in 1980. And again, this thing of not having someone tell you can't do something and that it's impossible, but taking the dream you have, which I'm a Scientologist. And at the time I had just found Scientology and I had these realizations of, oh my gosh, I want to compose music. And I was on fire. So nobody said, oh, it takes forever to write a musical. I just started writing. And I wrote this musical about the planet of artists. I called it Ataria. First, Artaria, like the Song of Art, but then I took out the R. It was too hard to say. It was Ataria. And then people thought it was a game, like a video game, but it wasn't. Anyway, so I wrote this with this friend of mine, Judy Chaikin. She wrote the script for it. And we were on fire. I mean, I started writing it in May, and by October, it was at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. They were doing we did a big backers audition for it. And I mean, 20-minute standing ovation, and I'm not exaggerating. It was just because it was so much passion in it. And I believed every word of what I was writing. It was really about me coming from Indiana and how you're just searching for what you want to do and you have a passion for it. And these kids in the town come together, and it was a great musical, I must say. And even Francis Ford Coppola's company was there. And anyway, a Broadway producer who I knew from my Charlie Brown days, Marvin Krause, I flew to New York and presented it to him, and he loved it. So he brought on 2 other producers, Lieber Krebs, and they then presented it to the Goodspeed Opera. We did all these different backward auditions with casts and so forth. And it ended up at the Goodspeed Opera House 2 years after I started writing it, which since then I've discovered it's supposed to be impossible to do. I mean, it takes forever. And once you start getting these considerations that you can't do it, the brakes come on. Well, if we flip forward to now, this is in early 2000s, and I say to my husband, I want New York again. So we took a small apartment in New York that we would just go back and forth from. And I contacted people I knew from my days of doing my Broadway stuff. And I resurrected out of the trunk, we call it the trunk in the Broadway world, my musical, and started rewriting it again. And I put the R back into the title, Artaria, changed the script a bit, and did a lot of recording. We had Hinton Battle, 3-time Tony Award winner, loved it. He came on board. The earlier cast actually had Donna Murphy, who was also a Tony Award winner in it. And Pee Wee Herman was in the original cast of my show. Yeah, he was actually developing Pee Wee Herman at the time. It was Paul Rubens. It was really funny. So now we're into the 2000s, and I'm just loving doing the Broadway stuff again and being in those rehearsal rooms in New York. And I pulled in an investor to put a lot of money into it, and we never could quite get the script right. It's a real, maybe at that point I'd started listening to other people too much. I'm not sure, but we did do a wonderful production of it off Broadway at the Brook Theater. And then I was back in LA, and I said, okay, I think now it's time to be Pauline Frechette again. Okay, now we're talking, now we're into like 2011, 12, something like that. And my husband said, well, just do your music again. You, instead of all, because it's so expensive, all the casts and everything, just be there with people and sing and tell your stories. So that's what I started doing again. And sat at the piano, started to get my piano chops back. I hadn't really played seriously since I was a kid, when I was winning competitions, when I was playing Rachmaninoff at 12 and 13 years old. Well, I hadn't done that since I was 12 and 13. So it's doing the scales again, and started writing piano music that was very much my own, and using my own name again, Pauline Frechette. And so I was discovering a new depth of myself, of who I really am, and developing these pieces, and created an album. The first album, Colors of My Heart, actually, it came out at #2 and #3 on the classical and the classical crossover Billboard charts. And I have a small label that a friend of mine had that helped me to get my music out there. And from there, we just continued. And I've continued since that point, and getting my work done by symphonies, and did more albums, and had my second album, which was a piano album, came out also on the top 10 Billboard charts. And the next 2 after that, in fact, one of the songs from that first album just hit the over million mark 2 days ago. So that's something to celebrate. On Spotify, Come Away With Me, it's the title of that piece. So I'm just continuing in that direction right now, which I'm loving. I had my first ballet piece was done with a symphony and a ballet company last December, with the New West Symphony and the California Contemporary Ballet Company. And that's kind of where my focus is now. I want to just create big, like a bigger music, just like a bigger family. And I'm continuing to create for symphonies and ballet companies, and probably want to do another musical. We'll see after the COVID and how the theater is going. But in the meantime, I think the main thing that I wanted to leave everyone with is the idea that it's all up to you. It's your world. It's your vision. It's what do you have the most passion for? I say that's the thing to follow. You follow what is it that you can't wait to get up and do every day? I mean, I at my age even, I mean, I look forward to, I practice a minimum 2 hours a day on piano. And if I'm getting ready for a show, it's 5 hours, 7 hours. But I love it. I love every bit of it. And I still do a lot of performing. So it's following your passion, being persistent, being focused, being honest with yourself, having a joie de vivre. And I always like to leave people with a quote. This is one that is one of my favorite, and it's by from L. Ron Hubbard's Code of Honor. Never regret yesterday. Life is in you today, and you make your tomorrow. So no matter how many times I've gotten knocked down, I get up again and I look at what do I want to create next? Come up with a great plan. Which, by the way, if you go to Scientology.org, you can do these little courses, and one that I've done many, many times. It's a small one called Targets and Goals. And it helps me focus in on exactly what's the goal that I want to do. And you can break it down to these really doable steps. And then you have a roadmap. Because, you know, if I'm setting out to do a driving trip from LA to New York, I'll never get there unless I have a map. So this gives you a really concise roadmap. So that's what I wanted to leave you with. And since I won't be available later today for one-on-ones, I just wrote down this is my, so you can all see, this is my email address, my website. You can contact me there, paulinefrechette.com. And I'd be more than happy to be in communication with anyone about any questions you have, or share music, share insights, whatever. And I want to thank so much Cass Warner for letting me know about Booker Washington's Wow. And thanks so much for having me on here. And back to you, the moderator.
Thank you, Pauline, for sharing about your persistence and following your dreams and your life's journey. I think it's something all individuals should do, to follow your dreams and be persistent. And so I thank you for your time.